A lonely mountain man wakes before dawn and freezes. There, tied to his gate, is a shivering teenage girl, her skin bruised, a wooden plank around her neck scrawled with the words, "Too fat to marry." He cuts her loose, meaning only to help. But when the snowstorm clears, whispers spread down the ridge. The runaway girl, the stolen watch, the man who hides her in his cabin. As the church bell tolls and the sheriff's boots echo down Main Street, the truth grows murkier than mountain fog. Because this isn't just about a girl's shame, it's about land stolen, graves disturbed, and a secret powerful men want buried forever. He thought he was saving a child. But the moment he took her in, he declared war on every lie the town was built on. When mercy defies the law, who stands for what's right? And who gets burned trying? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Nathan Hale stood in his doorway, watching the pre-dawn light paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gray. The winter wind bit through his wool shirt as he reached for his tin coffee pot. His morning routine never changed. Coffee first, then tend to the mules. The animals' soft nickering usually brought him comfort in his solitude, but today something was different. He squinted through the dim light toward his gate. Something was there that shouldn't be. His hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt as he stepped closer, boots crunching on frozen ground. The shape resolved into a human form, and Nathan's heart clenched. A young woman was bound to his gatepost, her wrists raw from rough rope. She slumped forward, dark hair hiding her face, wearing only a thin dress despite the bitter cold. Around her neck hung a crude wooden plank with words burned into it. "Too fat to marry." "Dear Lord," Nathan whispered, drawing his skinning knife. The girl flinched at his approach, trying to make herself smaller. "Easy now," he said softly, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "I'm going to cut you free. Won't hurt you none." His blade made quick work of the ropes. As they fell away, the girl's legs buckled. Nathan caught her before she hit the ground, noting the mud coating her dress and the bruises on her arms. She was a substantial weight in his arms, but he lifted her easily enough. "Name's Nathan Hale," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Got a warm fire inside. Let's get you out of this cold." He wrapped his old buffalo coat around her shivering form before carrying her into the line shack. The pot-bellied stove hissed as a log settled, making her jump. Nathan set her carefully in his only chair, positioned close to the warmth. "Coffee'll be ready soon," he said, moving slowly to avoid startling her further. "Got some venison stew I can heat up too." The girl's eyes darted around his simple home, from the neat bed in the corner to the rifle mounted on pegs above the door. Her breath came in shallow gasps. "That's a single action," Nathan explained, nodding toward the rifle. "Keep it unloaded when I'm inside. Safer that way." Some of the tension left her shoulders at that. She pulled the buffalo coat tighter around herself. "Could you tell me your name?" Nathan asked, spooning stew into a pot to heat. "Lottie Mae," she whispered, voice rough from cold and fear. "Lottie Mae Corman." Nathan knew that name. Abel Corman ran cattle north of town. Had a reputation for being hard on his hands and harder on his family. "Your stepfather's Abel Corman?" he asked carefully. Lottie Mae nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Said I was nothing but a burden. Too much trouble to feed, too ugly to marry off." Her voice broke. "Brought me out here in the dark. Said if I was such a burden I could be someone else's problem." Nathan's jaw tightened as he poured coffee into a tin cup. No man with an ounce of decency would treat a child that way, stepdaughter or not. He handed her the cup, making sure their fingers didn't touch. Drink this. It'll warm you some." Outside, the wind picked up, driving the first flakes of snow against the windows. Nathan frowned at the weather. His first instinct was to get Lottie to town right away, but a storm was brewing. The trail would be treacherous enough in daylight. In a snowstorm, it would be deadly. "Storm's coming in hard," he said, ladling hot stew into a bowl. "Reckon we'll have to wait it out. You eat this, get your strength back." Lottie accepted the bowl with trembling hands. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as her body demanded fuel. Nathan busied himself adding wood to the stove, giving her space. "I can make you a bed near the fire," he said when she'd finished. "Got plenty of blankets to keep you warm." Fear flickered across her face again. Nathan held up his hands. "I'll take my place by the door. No harm will come to you here. You have my word on that." He spread blankets on the floor near the stove, then settled himself in his chair by the door, well away from where Lottie would sleep. The old Bible his mother had given him sat on the small table beside him. He picked it up, letting it fall open to the Psalms. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows. Snow fell harder now, blanking out the world beyond the glass. Lottie huddled in her nest of blankets, watching Nathan with wary eyes that gradually grew heavy. Nathan read quietly by the light of the oil lamp, hearing her breathing slow as exhaustion finally overcame fear. Near dawn, she drifted into true sleep, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. The fire popped softly as Nathan closed his Bible. In the quiet hours of his watch, he'd made his decision. He would see Lottie Mae safe. First to town when the storm passed, then wherever the good Lord led after that. No child deserved to be treated as she had been. If standing between her and harm was what God asked of him, then that's what he'd do. Outside, the wind began to ease, and the sky lightened toward dawn. Nathan added another log to the fire and settled back in his chair, keeping his vigil as Lottie slept on, finally safe and warm. The events of the morning played through his mind, finding her bound and abandoned, the cruel sign around her neck, her fear and hunger. His jaw tightened again at the thought of Abel Corman's actions. Nathan had seen much cruelty in his years as a cavalry scout, but there was something especially evil about a man who would abuse his own family. Still, anger wouldn't help Lottie now. What she needed was protection, kindness, and a chance to heal. Nathan glanced at his Bible, remembering verses about defending the fatherless and showing mercy to those in need. Perhaps this was why God had led him to build his line shack here, why he'd stepped out at exactly the right moment to find her. The first rays of sun broke through the storm clouds, sending pale light through the windows. Nathan watched Lottie sleep, her breathing deep and even now. In sleep, the fear and pain had smoothed from her face, revealing the young girl she should have been allowed to remain, innocent and unafraid. He would have to be careful, he knew. The town gossips would talk when he brought her in. But that was a small price to pay for doing what was right. Nathan had lived alone with his grief and guilt for so long, keeping the world at arm's length. Now God had quite literally dropped someone at his doorstep who needed help. He wouldn't turn away from that responsibility. The storm continued to gentle, snow falling soft and steady now instead of driving sideways. It would delay their journey to town, but perhaps that was for the best. Lottie needed rest and time to recover her strength, and Nathan needed time to plan their next steps carefully. Abel Corman wouldn't take kindly to having his cruelty exposed. But those were concerns for later. For now, Nathan kept his quiet watch as the dawn brightened, guardian of this unexpected trust that had been placed in his hands. Whatever came next, he knew with certainty that protecting Lottie Mae was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Nathan hitched his team to the buckboard wagon. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a pristine white blanket that softened the rugged Colorado landscape. He adjusted the harness on his lead mule, checking each buckle with practiced care. Lottie emerged from the line shack wrapped in his buffalo coat, her eyes still shadowed with exhaustion. "I can walk to town," she said softly. "Don't want to be more trouble." Nathan paused in his work, taking in her swollen wrists where the rope had bit deep. A split lip stood angry and purple against her pale face. "No trouble," he said firmly. "Wagon's headed that way anyhow." He helped her up onto the wooden seat, tucking a wool blanket around her legs. The morning air held a sharp bite, and the trail down to Millstone would take half a day even in good conditions. With ice and ruts to navigate, they'd need to take it slow. The mules picked their way carefully down the mountain path, hooves crunching in the fresh snow. Nathan kept the reins loose, trusting their sure-footedness. Beside him, Lottie sat rigid at first, then gradually began to relax as the miles passed quietly. "Mama died 2 summers back," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fever took her quick. Abel, he changed after. Said I was eating too much. Taking up space meant for a proper daughter." She twisted the blanket between her fingers. "Said no man would want such a useless fat wife." Nathan's hands tightened on the reins, but he kept his voice steady. "Man who'd judge a person's worth by their size ain't worth listening to." They passed a small cabin tucked against the pines, smoke curling from its chimney. Ruth Standing Cloud lived there. Nathan knew, the half-Comanche midwife who served both town and tribal folks. He made note of it, thinking her healing knowledge might be needed. The sun had climbed past noon when they finally reached Millstone's muddy main street. The town wasn't much: a church, general store, telegraph office, and scattered buildings strung along the rutted road. Nathan helped Lottie down from the wagon, steadying her when she winced at putting weight on her feet. Dr. Harrow's office sat above the barber shop, marked by a weathered sign. The doctor barely looked up from his desk as Nathan explained the situation. His watery eyes flicked dismissively over Lottie. "Diet and shame," he muttered, shuffling papers. "Best cure for her condition. Nothing medical needed here." He waved them away, already turning back to his work. Nathan's jaw clenched, but he guided Lottie back outside without comment. The church stood across the street, its white paint peeling. Inside, Reverend Pike's reaction was little better. The preacher shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Nathan spoke. "The Ladies' Aid Society is... well, they're quite overspent at present," Pike said, not meeting their eyes. "Perhaps in a few months..." Their last hope was Mrs. Briggs's boarding house, but the sharp-faced woman cut Nathan off before he'd finished explaining. "We don't take charity cases," she said firmly. "And harboring a rancher's runaway. That's asking for trouble I don't need." She closed the door in their faces. Nathan felt his temper rising, hot and dangerous. But Lottie's quiet presence beside him helped him rein it in. Anger wouldn't help her now. He led her to the general store instead, buying salve for her wrists and soft flannel for bandages. The sun was sinking toward the mountains as they climbed back into the wagon. Pink light painted the snow-covered peaks as Nathan turned the team uphill, away from the town that had rejected them. "Reckon you could work for your keep-up at the shack," he said carefully. "Just until spring, while we sort things proper. Got plenty needs doing, cooking, mending, keeping accounts straight." He glanced at her. "If you've a mind to stay, that is." Lottie nodded, clutching the packages of medical supplies in her lap. Yes, sir, she whispered. I'd work hard, I promise. Nathan'll do, he said gently. No sir needed between friends. The mules plodded steadily upward as the sky darkened to purple. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt easier now, filled with shared purpose rather than fear. The line shack might be humble, Nathan thought, but it would be a sanctuary for Lottie until better options emerged. Sometimes the Lord's path forward wasn't clear all at once. You just had to take the next right step and trust in his guidance. The town's rejection had forced his hand, but Nathan found he didn't mind. Having someone to look after might be good for his soul, too. He'd been alone too long with his memories, letting grief wall him off from the world. Perhaps helping Lottie heal would help him find his way back to life as well. Stars were beginning to shine in the deep blue sky as they made their way home. Home. Nathan turned the word over in his mind. It felt right somehow, like a piece clicking into place. The line shack wasn't much, but it would shelter them both until spring brought new possibilities. For now, that would be enough. The rest would sort itself out in God's own time. Nathan snapped the reins lightly, encouraging the mules up the final stretch of trail. Behind them, Millstone's lights twinkled in the valley, but neither of them looked back. Dawn crept over the Colorado mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in soft golden light. Inside Nathan's line shack, lamplight pooled warmly across rough-hewn floorboards, while coffee steam curled through the crisp morning air. The single room felt different somehow, less hollow, more alive with possibility. Lottie stirred on her pallet near the stove, drawn from sleep by the enticing smell of bacon sizzling in Nathan's well-seasoned skillet. She blinked, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings, then remembered the events that had brought her here. Her muscles ached from the cold and rope, but the pain felt distant now, cushioned by the cabin's warmth. Nathan stood at the cook stove, his movements precise and practiced. He'd already been up for hours, seeing to the mules and bringing in fresh water. When he noticed Lottie was awake, he nodded in greeting. Thought we ought to set some ground rules, he said, sliding bacon onto a tin plate. Make things easier for us both. His voice was gentle but firm. Chores will share fair. Cooking, cleaning, feeding stock. Door latch works good and strong. You're welcome to use it when you need privacy. He gestured to the rifle still hanging on its pegs. That stays there unless needed for hunting. This is your home now, leased till spring, and I want you feeling secure. Lottie sat up straighter, touched by his consideration. Yes. Nathan, she said, remembering his request to drop the sir. He brought over 2 plates of bacon and corn pone, then paused. Would you care to say grace? Lottie hesitated, then clasped her hands. The only prayer she knew was one her mother had taught her as a child. God is great, God is good, she whispered. Let us thank him for our food. Amen. Nathan's amen was soft but sincere. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the pop and crackle of the stove. After breakfast, Nathan went out to split more wood for the growing cold. The rhythmic thunk of the axe drifted through the walls as Lottie set about tidying her sleeping pallet. She wanted to prove her worth, show Nathan he hadn't made a mistake in taking her in. By noon, she had a pot of venison stew simmering on the stove, filled with wild onions and the last of Nathan's stored potatoes. As she stirred, she found herself humming an old lullaby, one her mother had sung to her on stormy nights. Nathan stepped inside, arms full of split wood, and froze. The melody hung in the air between them like a tangible thing. His face went still, and Lottie saw something flash in his eyes, recognition, then pain. My Sarah, he said quietly. She used to sing that same tune. Lottie's hands stilled on the wooden spoon. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Nathan shook his head, setting down the wood. "No need for sorry. Been too long since these walls heard singing." He moved to hang up his trail coat, and Lottie noticed a long tear in the sleeve. "I could mend that for you," she offered quickly. "I'm good with a needle." Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged." Lottie found his sewing kit and settled by the window where the light was best. The tear wasn't too bad. A straight rip probably caught on barbed wire. As she worked, she accidentally pricked her finger and let out a small, startled laugh. To her surprise, Nathan chuckled too, a rusty sound, as if long unused. The shared moment of mirth seemed to ease something in the air between them. Later, Nathan disappeared into the lean-to storage shed and returned with a worn shawl of soft brown wool. "Was Sarah's spare," he said simply, holding it out. "No sense letting it go to waste." Lottie accepted the gift with trembling hands, recognizing the respect in the gesture. This wasn't sentimentality or charity. It was practical kindness, offered with dignity. The afternoon found them hauling water together from the creek, Nathan showing her how to break the ice without losing the bucket. The water was crystal clear and cold enough to make their teeth ache. "Nothing in the snares today," Nathan reported as they worked. "Winter's running lean this year." He glanced at her. "Come spring, we'll need to make proper arrangements. I'll write to the Territorial Orphan Office, see what options there might be. Meanwhile, you can earn your keep here. Honest work for a roof over your head." Lottie nodded, grateful for his matter-of-fact approach. No pity, just practical plans for moving forward. They spent the rest of the daylight hours on small tasks, banking the stove, sweeping the floor, checking the mules. The work felt good, purposeful, different from the endless, thankless labor at Abel's ranch. Here, Nathan acknowledged her efforts with quiet words of thanks. After a supper of stew and the last of the morning's corn pone, exhaustion crept over Lottie like a heavy blanket. She found herself nodding by the stove, the day's activities catching up with her still healing body. Through half-closed eyes, she watched as Nathan placed another log in the stove, adjusting it carefully for a long burn. "You're safe," she heard him whisper as he moved to latch the door against the moaning night wind. The words settled over her like the soft wool shawl around her shoulders. For the first time in years, Lottie felt the spark of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope, fragile as a bird's egg, but growing stronger with each passing hour in this humble cabin that was becoming a sanctuary. Outside, the wind keened around the eaves, but inside the line shack, warmth and peace held steady. The simple melody Lottie had hummed earlier seemed to linger in the air, no longer a reminder of loss, but a bridge between past and present, between Nathan's memories of Sarah and this new chance at healing for them both. The morning sun glinted off the hard-packed snow, turning the mountain slopes into a dazzling white blanket. Nathan hitched his mules to the wagon, checking each buckle with practiced care. The load of cordwood was stacked neat and high, ready for the trip down to Millstone. Lottie stepped out of the cabin, wrapped in Sarah's brown shawl and wearing the thick wool mittens Nathan had found in his storage chest. Her bruises had faded to yellowish patches, but still marked her face like shadows. She climbed up beside Nathan on the wagon seat, settling the rough blanket across their laps. "Ready?" Nathan asked, gathering the reins. Lottie nodded, her breath making little clouds in the crisp air. The mules started forward, their hooves crunching rhythmically in the packed snow. The wagon wheels creaked as they began their descent, following the winding trail toward town. As they passed Ruth Standing Cloud's cabin, smoke curled invitingly from her chimney. The door opened, and Ruth herself stepped out onto her porch, a basket of dried herbs in her arms. Her dark eyes took in Lottie's appearance with one careful sweep, noting the fading bruises and the way the girl held herself. Something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe, or concern. "My kettle's on if you need it later," Ruth called out, her voice carrying clearly in the winter air. She gave them a single, meaningful nod before turning back to her work. Nathan touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. He'd known Ruth Standing Cloud for years, respected her healing skills and quiet wisdom. Her offered. Hospitality wasn't something to take lightly. The rest of the journey passed quietly, with Lottie occasionally pointing out deer tracks in the snow or asking Nathan about the different types of evergreens that lined their path. By mid-morning, they rolled into Millstone, the wagon wheels leaving deep ruts in the muddy main street. Nathan pulled up in front of Henderson's general store, where he'd arranged to sell the cordwood. While the store owner counted out payment, Lottie helped Nathan load sacks of flour and sugar into the wagon's now empty bed. The routine task felt almost normal, like they'd been doing this together for years instead of days. "Magistrate Blakely's office is just down the street," Nathan said, pocketing the money from the wood sale. "Thought we might see about setting up a proper guardianship meeting, make everything legal and proper." Lottie's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering across her face. But before they could take more than a few steps, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. "There she is!" The shout came from Abel Corman, who was storming up the street with Sheriff Wendell Briggs in tow. Abel's face was red with fury or whiskey, maybe both, and he jabbed an accusing finger at Lottie. "That thieving girl stole my silver railroad watch." Lottie shrank back against the wagon, her face draining of color. "No," she whispered. "I never—" Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. His badge caught the winter sunlight as he moved. "Got a formal complaint here," he said, pulling out a folded paper. "Mr. Corman says the watch went missing the same night you ran off." Nathan moved to stand between Lottie and the men. "That's nonsense," he said firmly. "This girl hasn't stolen anything." A small crowd was gathering now, drawn by the raised voices. Nathan noticed several of the big ranchers among them, men whose votes kept Sheriff Briggs in office, men who did business with Abel Corman. "Law's the law," Sheriff Briggs said, not quite meeting Nathan's eyes. "Got to take her into custody until we sort this out. There'll be a hearing tomorrow morning." "You can't," Nathan started, but Lottie touched his arm. "It's all right," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "I'll go. Truth's on our side, ain't it?" Abel's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Truth? Girl's been nothing but trouble since her mama died. Should have sent her to the poor farm years ago." Nathan's hands clenched into fists, but he forced them to relax. Getting arrested himself wouldn't help Lottie. He watched helplessly as Sheriff Briggs led her away, her small figure made smaller by Sarah's shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The crowd began to disperse, drifting back to their business with whispers and sideways glances. Abel Corman stayed long enough to shoot Nathan a triumphant look before heading toward the saloon, his boots leaving deep prints in the muddy snow. Nathan stood still for a long moment, watching. The jail at the end of the street. Then he moved with purpose, securing the wagon and mules before walking to the small brick building. The sun was setting now, and lanterns were being lit along Main Street, their yellow glow reflecting off the fresh-fallen snow. He found the barred window that looked into the jail's single cell. Lottie sat on the narrow cot inside, her face pale in the growing darkness. The cell was drafty. Nathan could see her breath in the air. "Lottie," he called softly. She came to the window, her fingers wrapping around the iron bars. "I didn't take it, Nathan. I swear I didn't." "I know that," he said firmly. "You hold fast now, I'll bring truth to morning light, you hear? Lottie nodded, though tears shone in her eyes. I hear. Nathan reached through the bars to squeeze her hand once, then stepped back as Sheriff Briggs appeared in the doorway. The lawman wouldn't meet his gaze. The last of the sun's light was fading from the sky, turning the snow from white to blue-gray. Nathan stood for a moment longer, watching Lottie return to her cot in the drafty cell. His mind was already working, planning his next moves. Come morning, they'd need more than just truth. They'd need proof, and witnesses willing to stand against Abel Corman's influence. The jail's lantern cast a weak yellow glow through the barred window, barely reaching the street where Nathan stood. He thought of Ruth Standing Cloud's offer. My kettle's on if you need it later. Perhaps it was time to take her up on that hospitality. Ruth knew things about Abel Corman, about the town's workings. More importantly, she wasn't afraid to speak truth, no matter whose votes were at stake. Dawn crept over Millstone's frost-dusted rooftops as Nathan made his way down the empty street, a steaming pot of coffee in one hand and a thick wool blanket draped over his arm. His boots crunched on the frozen ground, each step deliberate and purposeful in the growing light. Deputy Wilson was already at his desk when Nathan reached the jail, barely awake but decent enough to nod approval when Nathan showed him the offerings. 10 minutes, the deputy said, unlocking the heavy door. Sheriff will be here soon enough. Lottie sat hunched on the narrow cot, Sarah's shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her face brightened at the sight of Nathan, though shadows marked the skin beneath her eyes. Brought you something warm, Nathan said, pouring coffee into a tin cup. And this blanket's seen better days, but it'll keep the chill off. Much obliged, Lottie whispered, wrapping her fingers around the cup. Steam rose between them as she took a careful sip. Didn't sleep much? Hearing set for mid-morning, Nathan told her, draping the blanket across her shoulders. Whatever happens, you ain't alone in this. The town hall filled quickly as the morning wore on. Farmers and shopkeepers pressed against the walls, while the more prominent citizens claimed the few scattered chairs. Nathan stood beside Lottie before Magistrate Blakely's desk, conscious of the whispers and stares around them. Abel Corman swaggered in just as the magistrate called the hearing to order. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, wearing a pressed shirt and polished boots, but his eyes held the same mean glitter Nathan had come to know. The matter before us, Magistrate Blakely began, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles, concerns the alleged theft of a silver railroad watch, value estimated at $25. Mr. Corman, you may present your complaint. Corman rose, tugging at his vest. Simple enough matter, Your Honor. That girl there, he pointed at Lottie, lived under my roof these past 3 years since her mama passed. Treated her like my own, I did, despite her. He paused, letting his gaze sweep Lottie's figure. Gluttony and ingratitude. Night she run off. My silver watch went missing from my desk. Railroad gave me that watch for 15 years' service. Ain't hard to figure what happened. Nathan felt Lottie trembling beside him. Before he could speak, Magistrate Blakely turned to them. Miss Corman, how do you answer these charges? I never touched his watch, Lottie said, her voice small but steady. Never even saw it, truth be told. Lies, Corman spat. Girl's got a history of taking what ain't hers. Ask anyone about the missing pies from Widow Henderson's windowsill last summer. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Nathan stepped forward. Your Honor, I request time to gather evidence in Miss Corman's defense. There's more to this story than what's being told. Magistrate Blakely studied them over his spectacles. The territorial prison's overcrowded as it is, he mused. Mr. Hale, are you willing to post surety for the accused? I am, Nathan said firmly, reaching for the money he'd earned from yesterday's cordwood. Whatever's required. Very well. I'll grant 1 week's time to present evidence, with Miss Corman to remain in town under your recognizance. Temporary bond set at $15. As Nathan counted out the money, he noticed Abel Corman's smirk. The man was playing some deeper game. But what? The crowd began dispersing, but the question of Lottie's lodging remained. Nathan couldn't take her back to his cabin without violating the magistrate's order to stay in town. Reverend Pike approached them, twisting his hat in his hands. The church, well, there's a bench in the back room. He trailed off as several ladies of his congregation made disapproving noises. She'll stay with me, Ruth Standing Cloud's voice cut through the murmurs. She stood in the doorway, straight-backed and dignified in her dark dress. I have a spare bed, and both Christian duty and Comanche hospitality call for sheltering those in need. Nathan saw several townspeople shift uncomfortably at the mention of Comanche ways, but Ruth's steady gaze never wavered. She was respected as a midwife and healer, even by those who whispered about her heritage. Thank you, Nathan said simply, meaning it with his whole heart. That afternoon, in Ruth's clean cabin that smelled of herbs and wood smoke, Ruth examined Lottie's fading bruises with gentle hands. This swelling, she said, touching Lottie's cheek. It's not from overeating. Salt and trauma, that's what I see. Poor diet, too. She mixed a poultice of herbs, explaining each one's purpose as she worked. While Lottie rested, Ruth drew Nathan aside. Listen close, she said in a low voice. I've seen shame kill as surely as winter cold. That girl needs more than just clearing her name. She needs to know her worth isn't measured by cruel men's words. Nathan nodded, understanding the weight of Ruth's warning. As evening approached, he lit the lamp in Ruth's cabin and spread a rough map of the town on her table. Lottie and Ruth gathered close as he outlined his plan. First, he said, marking points with his finger, we need to trace that watch's history. Railroad office keeps records. Might tell us something about when and how Abel really got it. Then we'll need to search his papers, but proper and legal-like, with the sheriff present if we can manage it. The ranch hands, Lottie said suddenly. Tom and Miguel, they were there that night. They saw... Saw what? Nathan asked gently. Saw him throw me out. Saw him reading by lamplight after, at his desk. If they're willing to speak truth. Nathan made another mark on his rough plan. We'll talk to them too. Quiet-like, so Abel don't catch wind too soon. The lamp cast warm shadows on the cabin walls as they finished planning. Ruth had set a pot of tea to steep, its fragrant steam mixing with the sharp scent of her healing herbs. In that moment, Nathan felt the first real hope since the arrest. Not just that they could prove Lottie's innocence, but that they could restore something deeper that Abel Corman had tried to break. Lottie sat straight-backed in her chair, Sarah's shawl still around her shoulders, but her eyes held a new light as she studied the map and added details about the ranch layout. She was no longer just running from cruelty. She was fighting back with truth, supported by those who saw her true worth. Ruth moved about the cabin, preparing the spare bed with fresh linens, her presence a quiet reminder that some battles were won not with fists or firearms, but with persistence, wisdom, and the steady flame of human dignity kept alive through the darkest nights. The evening settled around them as they refined their plans, each step carefully considered, each potential witness noted. They would need every day of their week's reprieve, but they would make each hour count toward proving not just Lottie's innocence, but her right to stand tall in the light of truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millstone's muddy main street as Nathan approached Dwyer's general store. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and the familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and dried goods greeted him. Mr. Dwyer looked up from his ledger, spectacles perched on his nose. "Morning, Nathan. What brings you to town so early?" Nathan removed his hat, running his fingers along the brim. "Need to ask about a watch sale, Mr. Dwyer. One you might have sold to Abel Corman last year." The shopkeeper's eyebrows lifted with recognition. "Ah, yes, that railroad-style timepiece. Fine piece it was." He closed his ledger and leaned forward on the counter. "Corman bought it on credit. Took him selling that bay broodmare of his to square the debt." "That's so." Nathan kept his voice neutral. "Seems odd for a man who claims the railroad gave him that watch for 15 years' service." Dwyer's mouth twitched. "That would be odd indeed." He glanced around the empty store before continuing in a lower voice. "You know, now that you mention watches, I remember Lottie's mother, God rest her soul. She had this delicate little lady's watch, silver, with some kind of worn engraving on the back. Used to wind it every morning right here while getting her supplies." Nathan's interest sharpened. "You ever see that watch after she passed?" "Come to think of it, no." Dwyer shook his head slowly. "Though I recall Lottie wearing it for a spell after her mama died. Haven't seen it in months now." Nathan nodded, filing away this information. "Much obliged for your time, Mr. Dwyer." The afternoon sun rode high as Nathan rode out to Corman's spread. He'd left his rifle at Ruth's cabin, carrying only a pocket knife, approaching as a peaceful man seeking truth, not confrontation. The ranch hands were working the winter feed lot, Tom and Miguel forking hay while steam rose from the cattle's breath. They tensed when they saw Nathan approaching, but relaxed somewhat when they noticed he was unarmed. "Afternoon," Nathan called out, keeping his voice easy. "Mind if we talk a spell?" Tom glanced toward the main house, then back at Nathan. "Boss ain't here right now." "Good. It's you fellows I'm wanting to speak with anyway." Nathan dismounted, leaving his horse ground-tied. "About that desk in Corman's study, the one with the missing watch." Miguel and Tom exchanged looks. Miguel spoke first, his words careful but clear. "That lock been broke since before Christmas. Wind caught the door one night, slammed it hard. Never did get fixed proper." Tom nodded in agreement. "Anyone could have opened it these past weeks. Not that we'd go nosing in the boss's business, mind you." "Course not," Nathan agreed. "You fellas were here the night Lottie left, weren't you?" Another shared glance between the ranch hands. Tom shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Saw him throw her out, if that's what you're asking. Called her things no man should call his kin. She didn't take nothing but the clothes on her back. We both saw that plain." Miguel stabbed his pitchfork into the hay with controlled anger. After, he sat at that desk reading by lamplight. For hours. We could see it from the bunkhouse. Never left that room till morning. Nathan's attention was drawn to movement near the new well, where a work crew was hauling up timber. The well sat along a dry arroyo that cut across the property. Something about its location nagged at his memory. Ruth had mentioned this place, called it something specific, a burial trace. He studied the arroyo's course, noting how it followed the natural contours of the land. The well had been dug deep, requiring substantial reinforcement. "That well's fairly new, isn't it?" "Put in last summer," Tom confirmed. "Boss was dead set on that spot, even though Miguel here told him the old ones used to leave that ground alone." Miguel crossed himself quickly. "My grandmother knew the old stories, said there were sacred places along this creek bed, places where the people laid their dead to rest. But Mr. Corman, he wouldn't listen." Nathan thanked them both and rode back to town, his mind working through the pieces. The sun was setting when he reached Ruth's cabin, casting long shadows through the ponderosa pines. Ruth was working at her herb table, while Lottie helped sort dried plants into careful bundles. Both looked up as Nathan entered. "Ruth," he said without preamble, That arroyo on Corman's land. You once called it a burial trace, didn't you? Ruth's hands stilled over her herbs. Yes. My grandmother spoke of it often. Our people buried their dead there for generations before the white settlers came. When Corman dug that well, she shook her head slowly. Many things were disturbed that should have been left in peace. And Lottie, Nathan turned gently to the girl, your mother's watch. What happened to it? Lottie's fingers trembled on the herbs she was holding. It was all I had left of her. Abel took it 6 months ago, said he needed to sell it to pay some debts. I never saw it again. Ruth's dark eyes flashed with understanding. The timing fits. He took her mother's watch, sold it, then bought another to replace it, only to accuse her of stealing that one when she finally fled his cruelty. It's not just about the watch anymore, is it? Nathan said quietly. It's about what's buried on that land, both treasure and truth. The pale moon rose over the cabin as they talked through their options. Ruth stoked the fire while Nathan paced the small room, working out their next steps. The circuit judge is due next week, Ruth said, measuring her words carefully. Judge Talley. He's known to be fair-minded, especially in matters concerning tribal lands and burial grounds. Nathan stopped pacing. We could petition him directly, ask him to inspect Corman's desk and books. And raise the matter of the burial ground protection, Ruth finished. The territorial governor signed that law last spring. Any disturbance of known burial sites requires proper permissions and oversight. 2 claims before the same judge, Nathan nodded. The truth about the Mjoi, watch, and the truth about the land. The truth about everything, Ruth said softly, looking at Lottie who sat quietly by the fire. All the things Abel Corman would rather keep buried. Through the cabin's window, the moon cast silver light across the snow-dusted ground. Nathan and Ruth exchanged a look of quiet determination. Tomorrow they would begin drafting their petition to Judge Talley, weaving together the threads of watch theft and land desecration into a single tapestry of truth that could no longer be denied. Lottie straightened in her chair, Sarah's shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. For the first time since her ordeal began, real hope showed in her eyes. Hope born not just from the prospect of proving her innocence, but from knowing that others would stand with her to see justice done. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Judge Horace Talley's carriage rolled into Millstone. Nathan watched from the boardwalk as the distinguished jurist stepped down, his black coat dusted with trail powder. The judge moved with deliberate care, each step measured like his thoughts. Ruth Standing Cloud stood beside Nathan, holding a leather folder containing their affidavits. Her face remained calm, but her fingers traced small circles on the worn leather, a gesture Nathan had come to recognize as her way of seeking patience. Judge Talley, Nathan said, touching the brim of his hat as the older man approached. We're grateful you'll hear our petition. The judge's keen eyes took in Nathan's weathered face, then shifted to Ruth's dignified presence. Mr. Hale, Ms. Standing Cloud, I understand you have evidence regarding both the Corman watch theft accusation and a matter of disturbed burial grounds. Yes, Your Honor. Ruth opened the folder, her movements precise. We have Mr. Dwyer's sworn statement about the watches, both the railroad watch Mr. Corman claims was stolen and a lady's watch belonging to Lottie's mother. Judge Talley accepted the first document, reading it in the clear morning light. His expression remained neutral, but his eyebrows lifted slightly at certain passages. And these other papers? My examination of Lottie's injuries, Your Honor, Ruth continued. The swelling pattern and bruising are consistent with physical abuse, not the effects of overeating as Mr. Corman claimed. And my grandmother's testimony about our people's burial grounds along the arroyo where Corman dug his new well. The judge read each document carefully, his weather-lined face growing more serious with each page. Finally, he looked up. These are grave matters, in more ways than one. Sheriff Wendell. The sheriff, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward. His usual swagger seemed diminished under the judge's stern gaze. We'll need to examine Mr. Corman's desk immediately. Have your deputy fetch him. Judge Talley turned to Nathan and Ruth. You'll both accompany us as witnesses. The law must see clearly in this matter. The group walked to Corman's ranch house, their boots crunching on frozen ground. Abel Corman met them at the door, his face flushed with barely contained anger. "This is harassment," he blustered, blocking the doorway. "You can't just—" "I can and I will, Mr. Corman," Judge Talley cut in, his voice sharp as a razor. "Step aside or face contempt charges." Corman's face darkened, but he moved. The study was a cluttered space that smelled of tobacco and old leather. The contested desk stood by a window, its broken lock obvious in the morning light. "Search it properly," the judge instructed Sheriff Wendell. "Every drawer, every folder." Nathan watched as the sheriff began pulling out papers, setting them carefully on the desktop. Ruth stood near the door, her presence steady as the mountains themselves. Corman paced behind them, his boots striking the floorboards with increasing agitation. "Here's something," Wendell said after several minutes. He held up a small paper slip, its edges worn. "Pawn receipt from Carson City. Lady's silver watch with engraving, dated 6 months ago." "That's private business," Corman snapped, starting forward. "Not anymore," Judge Talley said firmly. "Continue, Sheriff." More papers emerged, unpaid bills stacked in messy piles, overdue notices from the bank, and then something that made Nathan's breath catch. "Homestead transfer papers," Wendell announced, holding up several official documents. "In the name of Sarah Corman, Lottie's mother, for the Creekside parcel east of town." "Papers that should have been filed with the land office years ago," Judge Talley noted, his voice heavy with disapproval. "Papers that would have given Lottie's mother, and by inheritance Lottie herself, legal claim to valuable water rights." Abel Corman's pacing stopped. His face had gone from red to pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's chill. "You can't prove," he began. "I don't need to prove anything yet, Mr. Corman," Judge Talley interrupted. "These documents speak clearly enough for now. Sheriff, gather everything we've found. We'll need it for the full hearing." He turned to face Corman directly. "The theft charges against Lottie Mae Corman are dismissed. Furthermore, she is released from any claim of guardianship you might assert." "You can't do that," Corman's voice rose sharply. "I can and I have." Judge Talley's tone could have frozen water. "A full hearing will be held in 2 days' time to address all matters: the false accusation, the withheld property rights, and the violation of protected burial grounds. I strongly suggest you secure proper legal counsel, Mr. Corman." The judge turned to Nathan and Ruth. "Thank you for bringing these matters to the court's attention. Please inform Lottie that she is free to go where she chooses, though I'll need her testimony at the hearing." They left Corman standing in his study, his empire of lies crumbling around him. Outside, the winter air felt clean and sharp in Nathan's lungs. Ruth's eyes were bright with unshed tears of relief. "It's not finished," she said softly as they walked back to town, "but it's a beginning." "A good beginning," Nathan agreed. The sun was setting by the time they returned to Ruth's cabin. The warm smell of baking bread filled the small space. Lottie had been busy in their absence. She looked up anxiously as they entered, her hands dusty with flour. "The judge dismissed the charges," Nathan said simply. "You're free, Lottie." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but these were different from the tears of fear and shame she'd shed before. She looked down at the flatbread she'd been making, then back up at them with the first real smile they'd seen grace her face. "I didn't know what else to do while I waited," she said, gesturing at the bread. "Mama always said working dough helps settle the mind." "Your mama was a wise woman," Ruth said, hanging her shawl by the door. "And she left you more than just good advice about bread making. The judge found some papers." "Tomorrow," Nathan cut in gently. "Tonight, let's just enjoy this moment. And that bread smells mighty fine." As they shared the warm, flat bread, Lottie's laughter finally began to ease out, tentative at first, then growing more confident. Nathan found himself smiling more than he had in years. During a quiet moment, he pulled out a small piece of paper and began sketching rough measurements for a second bed, one that would fit nicely in his cabin's corner. Ruth watched him work, understanding in her eyes. "Planning ahead?" "Reckon so," he replied, adding notes about lumber he'd need. Future's starting to take shape. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Outside, snow began falling softly, but inside Ruth's cabin, warmth and hope had taken root. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges with the upcoming hearing, but tonight was for healing, for breaking bread together, and for letting laughter chase away the shadows of fear. The morning sun filtered through Millston's town hall windows, catching dust motes that danced above the packed benches. Nathan stood near the back, his hat in his hands, watching as Judge Talley settled behind the makeshift bench. The room buzzed with whispers and creaking boots until the judge's gavel struck wood. "This court is now in session," Judge Talley announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "We're here to address several interconnected matters concerning Miss Lottie Mae Corman, Mr. Abel Corman, and a disputed property claim." Ruth Standing Cloud rose first when called, her dark skirts rustling as she approached the front. She carried herself with quiet dignity, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "Please tell us about the burial grounds, Ms. Standing Cloud," Judge Talley requested. Ruth's voice was clear and steady. "The arroyo where Mr. Corman dug his new well crosses an ancient trace. My grandmother taught me its boundaries when I was a child. Our people have buried their dead there for generations." She paused, touching the silver cross at her neck. "When the well digging began, bones were disturbed, sacred ground violated." Abel Corman shifted in his chair, his face flushed. "There's no law about Indian graves," he interrupted. "A man's got rights to water on his own land." Judge Talley's gavel cracked sharply. "Mr. Corman, you will remain silent until addressed." He turned back to Ruth. "Please continue." "The territorial law may be thin on such matters," Ruth acknowledged, "but the moral duty to respect the dead knows no boundaries of race or creed." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Well said, Ms. Standing Cloud. While our current statutes may indeed be lacking, this court recognizes that justice must consider more than mere legal technicalities." He made several notes before looking up. "Mr. Dwyer, please step forward." The general storekeeper approached, clutching several papers in his weathered hands. "Your Honor, these are my business records regarding 2 watches. The railroad watch Mr. Corman claims was stolen, which I sold him last year, and a lady's silver watch I later took in pawn from him." "The same watch that belonged to Lottie's mother?" "Yes, sir. It had an engraving inside the case. 'To Sarah, all my love.' I remembered it special because Mrs. Corman used to wind it every morning on her way to fetch water." Judge Talley examined the pawn slips carefully. "And the date of this transaction?" 6 months ago, Your Honor. Mr. Corman said he had full rights to dispose of it." Sheriff Wendell was called next. His usual confidence dimmed as he stood before the judge. "Looking back," he admitted, tugging at his vest, "I should have investigated more thoroughly before acting on Mr. Corman's complaint. I let his standing in the community influence my judgment. A sheriff's badge demands more than convenient justice, Judge Talley reminded him sternly. Yes, Your Honor. I aim to do better. When Lottie's turn came, Nathan watched her gather her courage. She wore Ruth's spare dress, pressed clean, and though her hands trembled slightly, she held her head high. Miss Corman, the judge said kindly, please tell us about your mother's watch. Lottie's voice wavered at first but grew stronger as she spoke. After Mama died, it was all I had left of her. When Abel, Mr. Corman, started selling things to pay his debts, I hid it away. At least, her voice caught. I thought I did. But when I looked for it months later, it was gone. He'd already found it and pawned it himself. And the railroad watch he accused you of stealing? I never touched it, Your Honor. Never even saw it, except on his desk sometimes. When he threw me out that night, tied me up in the cold, he knew I hadn't taken anything. He just wanted... She paused, steadying herself. He wanted to make sure I couldn't claim what was rightfully mine. Judge Talley's face softened with compassion, but his voice remained judicial as he addressed the room. Having heard the testimony and examined the evidence, this court finds as follows. He lifted his gavel. First, regarding the accusation of theft against Lottie Mae Corman, the charge is dismissed. There is no evidence to support it, and substantial reason to believe it was filed maliciously. The gavel struck once. Abel Corman's face darkened, but he remained silent. Second, regarding the homestead transfer papers found in Mr. Corman's desk, these documents clearly establish Sarah Corman's legal claim to the Creekside parcel. As her sole heir, Lottie Mae Corman is hereby recognized as the rightful owner of said property and all associated water rights. Another strike of the gavel. Lottie pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Third, concerning the well dug along the burial trace, Mr. Corman, you will cease all further digging or development at that location pending a full territorial review. This court recommends the formation of a commission to establish guidelines for the protection of indigenous burial grounds, but until such time, basic human decency must prevail. The final strike of the gavel echoed through the hushed room. This court is adjourned. The townspeople began filing out, their murmured conversations filling the air. Abel Corman stormed past without a word, his boots striking the floorboards hard enough to raise dust. Nathan made his way to where Lottie stood with Ruth, both women embracing as tears flowed freely. The papers, Miss Corman, Judge Talley said, approaching them with the homestead documents. I suggest you keep these very safe. Lottie accepted them with trembling hands. Thank you, Your Honor. For everything. Justice served is thanks enough, he replied kindly. Good day to you all. The afternoon sun had taken on the golden quality of late winter when they reached Ruth's cabin. The air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. Inside, Ruth stirred a pot of celebratory stew while Nathan built up the fire. Come spring, Nathan said, watching Lottie carefully fold her mother's homestead papers. We'll get that creek parcel fenced proper. Good water there for a kitchen garden. Lottie nodded, tucking the precious documents into Ruth's family Bible. The tension she'd carried in her shoulders for so long seemed to melt away as she closed the book's leather cover. I can hardly believe it's real, she whispered. Real as the mountains, Ruth assured her, setting bowls of steaming stew on the table. Real as the grace that brought you to Nathan's gate that morning. They ate together in the warm cabin while winter light painted the walls gold. The stew was rich with rabbit and wild onions, seasoned with Ruth's herbs and the salt of happy tears. Every now and then, Lottie would touch the Bible where it lay beside her, as if reassuring herself that her mother's legacy and her own future was truly secure. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-crusted ground as Nathan and Lottie loaded supplies into the buckboard. The air held that particular mountain clarity that made distant peaks seem close enough to touch. Their breath formed white clouds in the cold, but the sky promised fair weather for their journey back to Nathan's shack. Ruth Standing Cloud stood in her doorway, a wrapped bundle of dried herbs and cornbread in her hands. "For your pantry," she said, passing it to Lottie. "Remember, Sundays after service. My kettle will be waiting." Lottie hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you for everything, Ruth." "Go on now," Ruth smiled, adjusting the shawl around Lottie's shoulders. "Get settled before the next storm comes." The ride-up took most of the morning. Nathan let the mules set their own steady pace on the climbing trail, while Lottie watched the changing landscape with new eyes. This wasn't a forced exile anymore. It was a journey home. "First thing," Nathan said as they approached the shack, "we'll need to shore up that roof before the next snow. I've been meaning to replace some shakes." Lottie nodded, already cataloging the work ahead. The small building looked weathered but solid, smoke rising straight from the stone chimney where they'd banked the morning fire. They unloaded the supplies first, organizing flour and sugar in the crude cupboard, hanging dried meat from the rafters. Nathan brought in his tool chest, while Lottie swept the packed dirt floor, humming softly. "Mind holding these steady?" Nathan asked, gathering split shakes he'd prepared earlier. He set up the ladder against the south wall, where several roof shingles had worked loose. Lottie proved a capable assistant, handing up tools and materials as Nathan worked. The familiar rhythm of hammer on nails filled the crisp air. By early afternoon, the roof was sound, and they turned their attention to the drafty east window. "Oiled paper's not fancy," Nathan explained, showing Lottie how to stretch the translucent material over the window frame. "But it lets in light and keeps out wind. Come spring, we might manage real glass." The paper glowed amber in the afternoon sun, casting warm light across the cabin's single room. Lottie ran her fingers over the smooth surface. "It's like honey," she said softly. Nathan smiled. "Reckon it does have that look." They broke for a simple meal of cornbread and jerky before tackling the next task, building Lottie a proper bed. Nathan had already gathered straight lodgepole pines, stripped of bark and dried. "My father taught me furniture making," he explained, demonstrating how to notch the poles for joining. "Said a man should know how to build what he needs." Lottie watched intently as Nathan showed her how to measure and mark the wood. She helped hold pieces steady as he worked, learning the names of tools: draw knife, auger, chisel. By sunset, the bed frame took shape, sturdy and simple, but crafted with care. "Tomorrow we'll lash the rope supports," Nathan said, stepping back to examine their work. "Make it proper comfortable." After supper, Nathan took down his rifle from the pegs. "Time you learned about firearms," he said carefully, watching Lottie's reaction. "Not for sport or showing off, for safety's sake." Lottie's hands trembled slightly as Nathan placed the unloaded revolver in them. "It's heavier than I expected," she said. "First rule, treat every gun as if it's loaded," Nathan explained. He showed her how to check the chambers, how to hold the weapon safely. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, and never point it at anything you don't intend to hit." They practiced proper stance, Lottie learning to balance the weight. Nathan demonstrated the half-cock position, explaining how it prevented accidental discharge. "Some folks carry with an empty chamber under the hammer for extra safety," he added. "Better to take that extra moment than risk an accident." Lottie listened intently, but seemed relieved when they put the firearms away. "I'd rather learn about the ledgers," she admitted. "Numbers make more sense to me than guns." Nathan brought out his account books, showing her his simple system for tracking expenses and supplies. Lottie's quick mind grasped the concepts easily. Together, they drafted a careful letter to the Territorial Land Office regarding her creek parcel. "We'll need to be precise," Nathan said, dipping his pen carefully. "Government folks appreciate clear writing and proper forms." Lottie dictated while Nathan wrote, describing the property boundaries and her claim as her mother's heir. They composed a second letter to a Denver attorney Nathan knew of, requesting guidance on proper filing procedures. "I'll ride these to town before noon," Nathan said, sealing the envelopes. "Might be weeks before we hear back, but it's important to start the process proper." While Nathan made the trip to Millston, Lottie stayed busy at the shack. She organized their supplies, swept again, and began preparing a stew for supper. By the time Nathan returned, the cabin was filled with the rich smell of simmering meat and vegetables. "Letters are safely posted," he reported, hanging his coat by the door. "Stopped by the store too. Got some extra coffee and that writing paper you mentioned." They ate their supper in comfortable silence, the fire crackling in the stove. After the dishes were cleaned, Nathan reached for his Bible, its leather cover worn smooth with use. "Would you read with me?" he asked quietly. Lottie nodded, moving her chair closer to share the lamplight. Nathan turned to the 23rd Psalm, and their voices joined together in the familiar words. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The ancient verses filled the small room, speaking of green pastures and still waters, of comfort and guidance through dark valleys. Lottie's voice grew stronger with each line, the words taking on new meaning in this place of safety. When they finished reading, Nathan closed the Bible gently. "Come spring," he said, "we'll plant beans along that south wall. Good soil there, gets the morning sun." "I'd like that," Lottie replied, her face soft in the lamplight. "Mama always said a garden makes a home." The fire settled with a soft pop, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, a night bird called, answered by its mate. Within the snug cabin, the evening's peace wrapped around them like a warm blanket, transforming the simple space into something more, a place of belonging, of new beginnings. Lottie took up her mending while Nathan whittled a new handle for a broken tool. The lamp burned steady, and the familiar sounds of home filled the comfortable silence. The crackle of the fire, the whisper of thread through fabric, the soft scrape of knife on wood. Neither felt the need to speak, each content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring honest work, shared purpose, and another step toward their shared future. The bitter wind howled down the ravine like a hungry wolf, rattling the cabin's shutters. Lottie Mae pulled her shawl tighter and glanced out the window at the deepening twilight. Nathan had left an hour ago to check his trap line, promising to return before full dark. The temperature was dropping fast, and she wanted the cabin warm for his return. The iron stove had cooled somewhat since he'd left. Lottie opened the heavy door and carefully placed 3 split logs inside, just as Nathan had shown her. The dry wood caught quickly, but the room wasn't warming as fast as she'd like. Remembering how Nathan adjusted the damper to control the fire's intensity, she gave it a firm turn. The flames roared higher, and Lottie smiled with satisfaction. She added 2 more logs for good measure. The stove's sides began to glow a dull red, and waves of heat pushed back the evening chill. Pride swelled in her chest. She could manage things, prove her worth. Beneath the plank floor, in a gap too small to notice, a wayward ember found its way through. It nestled in the dry tinder of old leaves and twigs that had accumulated over the years. The spark took hold, feeding on decades of dust and debris. Outside, Nathan was hurrying home through the gathering dusk. The trapline had yielded nothing, and the wind carried an edge that promised snow. As he crested the last rise before the cabin, an acrid scent stopped him cold. Smoke. Not the clean wood smoke of the chimney, but something else. He broke into a run, boots crunching on the frozen ground. Thin wisps of gray leaked from beneath the cabin's foundation. "Lottie," he shouted, bursting through the door. The girl spun around, startled. "Nathan, what's wrong?" "Fire, under the floor." He grabbed the water bucket and threw it open. "Get the spare barrel." Lottie's face went pale, but she moved quickly. Together they hauled water from the rain barrel outside, throwing it wherever smoke seeped through the floorboards. But the fire had found purchase in the dry timbers. Flames began licking up through the gaps between the planks. "It's spreading too fast," Nathan gasped, his face streaked with soot. The heat was intense now, and smoke filled the upper part of the room. He grabbed Lottie's arm. "Out, now." "But our things," she protested. "Out." He shoved her toward the door, then turned back into the thickening smoke. The Bible, his wife's Bible, lay on the table, along with Lottie's homestead papers. He lunged for them, singeing his forearm as a tongue of flame shot up nearby. The papers secured, Nathan stumbled toward the door. Behind him, there was a terrible crack as one of the roof beams gave way. He dove through the doorway just as the roof began to cave in, landing hard in the snow beside Lottie. They watched in horrified silence as flames devoured the small cabin. The heat was fierce enough to melt the snow nearby, creating a circle of bare earth around the inferno. Above them, real snow began to fall. Fat, lazy flakes that seemed to mock their predicament. "I'm sorry," Lottie whispered, her voice breaking. "I must have turned the damper too far. I just wanted it to be warm when you got back." Her shoulders began to shake. "I ruin everything I touch." "No," Nathan said firmly, though his heart ached at the destruction. "It was an accident. Could have happened to anyone." He tried to catch her eye, but she wouldn't look at him. "Everything you own." Lottie's voice was hollow. "Your home." "Things can be rebuilt," Nathan said, but he could see she wasn't hearing him. The shame that had been burned away by days of acceptance and trust was flooding back, drowning her in familiar self-loathing. They salvaged what they could from around the cabin, some tools from the lean-to, a few supplies that had been stored outside. The fire burned hot and fast, consuming years of Nathan's solitary life in less than an hour. By the time the flames died down to embers, the snow was falling steadily. Nathan constructed a crude shelter using a tarp and some pine boughs, building a small fire well away from the smoldering ruins. He wrapped Lottie in his coat, but she remained withdrawn, her eyes fixed on the dying flames of their home. "We'll ride to Ruth's tomorrow," he said, trying to sound confident. "Weather holds, we can start rebuilding in a few days." But Lottie didn't respond, lost in her own dark thoughts. The night grew colder. Nathan dozed fitfully beside their small fire, exhausted from the evening's efforts. His scorched arm throbbed, and worry for Lottie gnawed at him. She'd barely spoken since the roof collapsed, turning away from his attempts at comfort. Near midnight, while Nathan slept, Lottie rose silently. She found the crude plank that had been hung around her neck just days ago, the one that read "Too fat to marry" in rough letters. With trembling hands, she placed it carefully against a snow-covered stump. Tears freezing on her cheeks, she took one last look at Nathan's sleeping form. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she turned and walked into the darkness, heading toward the river valley below. The falling snow quickly covered her tracks as she disappeared into the night. Behind her, Nathan stirred briefly in his sleep, unaware that Lottie was gone. The bed of embers that had been his home glowed dully in the snowfall, while the wind continued its mournful song through the ravine. The note remained propped against the stump, a stark reminder of the shame that had driven Lottie back into the darkness, leaving Nathan sleeping beside the ashes of their brief attempt at building something like family. The bitter pre-dawn air bit through Nathan's clothes as he dozed fitfully beside the dying fire. A gust of wind sent a cloud of ash swirling into his face, jerking him awake with a start. He blinked and coughed, reaching automatically for the coffee pot that should have been warming on the stones. His hand found nothing. The events of the night rushed back: the fire, the collapse of his cabin, Lottie's quiet despair. He turned to check on her and found only empty space where she should have been huddled in his coat. "Lottie?" His voice cracked from smoke and sleep. No answer came back through the darkness. Nathan pushed himself up, muscles stiff from the cold ground. The gray light of approaching dawn revealed fresh snow covering their makeshift camp. His eyes caught on something propped against a nearby stump, the crude wooden plank that had hung around Lottie's neck when he first found her. The sight of those harsh words, "too fat to marry," sent ice through his veins that had nothing to do with the winter morning. Panic rose in his throat, but years of tracking discipline took over. He forced himself to think clearly, to act with purpose rather than fear. The mule still stood in the lean-to, and his saddle had survived the fire. He worked quickly, his burned arm protesting as he cinched the girth tight. Into his saddlebags went the few blankets they'd salvaged, his old lantern, and what little food remained from their outdoor stores. His mind fixed on Ruth Standing Cloud's cabin as the nearest safe haven and the wisest first stop. Ruth would know what to do. She always did. The eastern sky was just beginning to pearl when Nathan guided his mule down the trail. Every bend in the path revealed fresh snow that might hide Lottie's tracks, driving him to move faster than was strictly safe on the slick ground. The mule picked its way carefully, steam rising from its flanks in the cold air. Ruth's cabin appeared through the trees, smoke already rising from her chimney. Nathan's heavy knock brought her to the door quickly, as if she'd been awake and waiting for trouble to arrive. "Nathan?" Her dark eyes took in his soot-stained clothes, and the worry etched on his face. "What's happened?" He held up the wooden plank, words catching in his throat. Ruth read the cruel message, her expression hardening as understanding dawned. Without another word, she disappeared inside, returning moments later with her beaded medicine satchel and a pair of traditional snowshoes. "The cabin burned last night," Nathan explained, as Ruth laced up her snowshoes. "An accident with the stove. Lottie blamed herself. I fell asleep, and when I woke..." He gestured helplessly with the plank. "She'll have followed the river," Ruth said decisively, securing her satchel. "It's the only clear path in fresh snow, and it leads to town. We'll find her, Nathan. Shame lies to young hearts, makes them believe they're worthless. But shame lies." They set out together, Ruth's snowshoes allowing her to break trail while Nathan led the mule. Near the river, they found the first signs, partial footprints where the snow had drifted less deeply under the trees. They followed the tracks along the ice-bound river, calling Lottie's name into the strengthening dawn. "The cold will have slowed her," Ruth said, her voice steady and reassuring. "She's strong, with more endurance than she knows, but she's tired and hungry. We'll find her." Nathan nodded, clinging to Ruth's certainty like a lifeline. The sky darkened as they pressed on, and a gray squall rolled down from the peaks, bringing stinging wind and fresh snow. They crossed a shallow braid in the river, ice popping ominously under their weight. Nathan guided the mule carefully across, one step at a time. "There!" Ruth pointed suddenly, Nathan's heart leaped as he spotted a familiar flash of fabric, his late wife's shawl, the one he'd given to Lottie, snagged on a stand of winter bare willows. He rushed forward to retrieve it, the wool damp and cold in his hands. "She can't be far," Ruth said, but worry had crept into her voice. The day was waning, temperature dropping with the sun. They pressed on with renewed urgency, Ruth murmuring prayers in Comanche as they searched. Darkness fell fully, and Nathan lit the lantern. Its yellow light wavered over the snow, creating strange shadows that played tricks with his desperate eyes. Every dark shape could be Lottie, every shadow a huddled form in the snow. The wind had picked up, drowning out their calls. Ruth stopped suddenly, raising her hand for silence. "Listen!" At first, Nathan heard nothing but the wind. Then, a sound. A soft moan, barely audible, from behind a snowdrift ahead. They rushed forward, lantern light revealing a crumpled form in the snow. Lottie lay curled on her side, breath coming in foggy pants, her lips tinged blue. Her eyes were closed, but she was alive. "Lottie," Nathan choked out, dropping to his knees beside her. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch. Ruth was already pulling blankets from the saddlebags, her practiced hands checking Lottie's pulse and breathing. "We need to warm her slowly," Ruth instructed. "Help me wrap her properly." Together they bundled Lottie in layers of wool and buffalo hide. Nathan gathered her into his arms, her body terrifyingly limp, and with Ruth's help, they managed to get her draped across the mule's back. "My cabin's closest," Ruth said, already turning back the way they'd come. "Step by step, Nathan. We'll get her there." The return journey was agonizing. Every step had to be carefully placed in the growing darkness. The mule moved slowly, understanding its precious cargo. Nathan kept one hand on Lottie's wrapped form, feeling for each shallow breath, while Ruth broke trail ahead with her snowshoes. The wind drove snow into their faces, and the cold tried to work its way through their clothes. But they pressed on. Ruth's quiet determination helped steady Nathan's fears. Step by grinding step through the deepening snow, they made their way back toward warmth and safety, toward hope. The storm drummed against Ruth's cabin walls, its rhythm a constant companion to their desperate vigil. Inside, the air hung thick with worry and wood smoke as Ruth and Nathan worked to save Lottie's life. The girl lay bundled in quilts near the hearth, her face flushed with fever despite her brush with freezing. Ruth moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping heated stones in flannel and tucking them around Lottie's feet. "We must warm her slowly," she reminded Nathan, who hovered nearby with anguish etched on his weathered face. "Too fast could harm her heart." Nathan nodded, his burned arm forgotten in his concern for Lottie. He helped Ruth prop Lottie up slightly as she brought a cup of steaming willow bark tea to the girl's blue-tinged lips. "Small sips," Ruth murmured, tilting the cup carefully. "That's it, child." Lottie swallowed reflexively, but her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and quick. Sweat beaded on her forehead even as shivers racked her frame. Ruth checked her fingers and toes regularly, watching for signs of frostbite's cruel damage. "The broth next," Ruth directed, reaching for a pot that simmered on her cook stove. "She needs strength to fight." As they worked together through the night, Lottie drifted in and out of consciousness. Her mumbled words grew increasingly clear, though they cut deeper than any winter wind. "Please, God," she whispered, tears sliding from beneath closed lids. "Make me small enough to be loved. Just small enough to matter." Nathan's hand tightened around Lottie's cold fingers. His own tears fell freely now, dropping onto the quilts. "You already fit," he said hoarsely, pressing her hand over his heart. Right here, you fit perfect as you are." His voice broke as he added, "I won't leave you, Lottie. Not ever again." Ruth moved to the other side of the bed, her dark eyes gentle as she smoothed Lottie's damp hair back from her forehead. She began to pray, her voice carrying both Comanche and English words to heaven. "Great Spirit, watch over this beloved daughter. She is precious, she is wanted, she is yours." The ancient words of her people followed, asking protection and healing for one who belonged to the circle of family. Through the long hours, they traded places, keeping watch. When Nathan's exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Ruth urged him to rest briefly while she changed the cooling stones and applied fresh poultices to draw out the fever. When Ruth needed to gather more herbs from her stores, Nathan sat vigil, speaking softly to Lottie of spring plans and future mornings. The wind continued its assault on the cabin walls as one day bled into the next. They marked time by the need to add logs to the fire, to offer more sips of broth and tea, to check Lottie's temperature with gentle touches to her forehead. Ruth's practiced hands assessed the color returning to Lottie's extremities, ensuring frostbite wouldn't claim fingers or toes. "She's fighting," Ruth assured Nathan as the second night descended. "Her spirit is stronger than the shame that drove her into the snow." Nathan hadn't left Lottie's side, except when absolutely necessary. His own exhaustion showed in the dark circles under his eyes and the slump of his shoulders, but he remained steadfast. Every time Lottie stirred or made a sound, he was there, speaking soft words of encouragement and love. As the second dawn approached, a change came over Lottie. Her breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The flush of fever began to fade from her cheeks, and her skin felt cooler to the touch. Ruth noticed first, her experienced hands detecting the shift as she checked Lottie's pulse. "The fever's breaking," she announced quietly, relief evident in her voice. Nathan straightened from his slouched position, hope lighting his tired eyes. They watched together as Lottie's eyelids fluttered, and then opened, her gaze clear for the first time in 2 days. "Nathan?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the quiet cabin. "I'm here," he answered immediately, squeezing her hand. "Ruth's here too. You're safe." Lottie's eyes filled with tears as memory returned. "The cabin... I'm so sorry, I ruined everything." "No," Nathan said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm the one who's sorry. I should have seen how deep your hurt went. Should have made sure you knew." He paused, gathering himself. "Should have made sure you knew how much you matter." "You found me," Lottie whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "When I was lost in the dark and the cold, you found me. That means everything." Ruth appeared at the bedside with a small bowl of thin porridge, her smile gentle and knowing. "Here's something to put strength back in your bones," she said, helping Lottie sit up slightly against the pillows. "Small bites now, no rushing." Nathan finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of his exhaustion. Ruth gestured to a bench near the fire where she'd laid out a blanket. "Rest now," she told him. "The worst has passed." He wanted to protest, to stay at Lottie's side, but his body betrayed him with a massive yawn. Lottie managed a weak smile. "Sleep," she said softly. "I'll still be here." Nathan made his way to the bench, every step heavy with fatigue. As he stretched out, the warmth of the fire seeping into his tired muscles, he watched Ruth tenderly helping Lottie with the porridge. The scene before him blurred as his eyes grew heavy. The storm outside had gentled to a soft patter of snow against the windows. Inside Ruth's cabin, gratitude filled every corner of the small room, as tangible as the wood smoke and healing herbs. Love had won out over shame, truth over lies, and life over the killing cold. Nathan's last conscious thought before sleep claimed him was a prayer of thanks for second chances and the gift of family found in unexpected places. Ruth watched over them both, Lottie taking small, determined bites of porridge, and Nathan finally allowing himself the rest he desperately needed. Her cabin had become a sanctuary of healing, not just for bodies, but for hearts long wounded by the world's cruel judgments. She added another log to the fire and settled in to keep watch over her chosen family as the winter morning light grew stronger outside. The winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground as Nathan's wagon creaked up the familiar trail to his claim. Beside him sat Lottie, wrapped warmly in a borrowed coat, while Ruth followed on her sturdy pony. A week had passed since Lottie's fever broke, and the roads had finally hardened enough for travel. The blackened bones of Nathan's cabin came into view, stark against the white landscape. But before they could begin their grim task of salvage, the sound of approaching hooves made them turn. Tom Parker, a neighbor who had once whispered doubts about harboring Lottie, rode up with his wagon piled high with fresh-cut timber and a box of nails. "Thought you might could use these," he said, ducking his head. "My boy and I cut extra last month." More neighbors appeared throughout the morning. Mrs. Wilson, who had turned away at the boarding house, brought 2 carefully folded quilts. The Cooper family arrived with a near-new Dutch oven, saying they had an extra. Each offering came with awkward but genuine apologies, met with quiet grace by Lottie and understanding nods from Nathan. Around noon, Reverend Pike's wagon appeared. The preacher's face was drawn with remorse as he approached their small group. "The Ladies' Aid Society," he began, clearing his throat. "They've taken up a collection." He handed Nathan an envelope. "It's not much, but they want to help make things right." Ruth took charge of organizing the volunteer labor, her practical nature perfectly suited to directing the reconstruction. "These timbers here can be salvaged for the floor joists," she called out, pointing to the least damaged beams. "And we'll need a proper foundation this time, with stones from the creek bed." The work moved quickly with so many hands. Nathan found himself working alongside men who weeks ago had avoided his eyes in town. They raised the new walls, together, the solid thunk of hammers creating a rhythm of redemption. Mid-afternoon, Ruth spotted a rider approaching from town. It was young Billy from the telegraph office, waving a yellow envelope. "Message from Denver," he called out, pulling up his horse. Ruth took the telegram and brought it to where Nathan and Lottie sat, taking a brief rest. The news brought fresh hope. The attorney confirmed that Lottie's claim to the creek parcel would be honored once properly filed. The territorial office had logged receipt of their initial paperwork. "Your mother's land will be yours," Nathan said softly to Lottie, watching her eyes fill with happy tears. Between directing the construction, Nathan worked on a special project, a wooden sign for the gate. His knife moved carefully through the pine board, carving clean, simple letters. He kept the work hidden, saving it for the right moment. During quiet afternoons, Lottie and Ruth sat at Ruth's small table, heads bent together over papers as they planned something new. Their vision was taking shape. A small school, meeting in the church on weekdays, specifically for girls nobody wanted. Lottie's eyes shone with purpose as she described teaching not just reading and figures, but also self-worth and strength. The disputed well that had caused so much trouble remained quiet. Abel Corman kept his distance, the judge's warning about further digging apparently taking root. His absence allowed healing to grow like spring grass after winter's retreat. As the sun began its descent on the final day of building, Nathan hung the new door on carefully oiled hinges. The fresh roof timbers gleamed with frost in the fading light, and smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney they had all built together. Inside the newly completed cabin, Nathan, Ruth, and Lottie stood in a small circle, their hands linked in the gathering dusk. The room smelled of fresh-cut wood and possibility. Nathan's rough palm held Lottie's softer one on his right, while his left hand clasped Ruth's strong, capable fingers. They bowed their heads together, offering thanks for deliverance, not just from winter storms and fever, but from loneliness and shame. Their words rose to the new rafters, a prayer of gratitude for walls that would shelter love instead of isolation, for a door that would welcome instead of shut out, and for the strength found in joining hands with others. The light outside deepened to purple as they stood together in their simple circle, three souls bound by choice and grace, while the evening star rose to bless their new beginning. The morning dawned crisp and bright, with snowmelt swelling the creek to a rushing song. Spring had crept into the valley overnight, painting the willows with the faintest green. Church bells rang across Millstone, calling the faithful to Sunday service. Inside the small wooden church, Reverend Pike's voice carried a new humility as he spoke of redemption. The pews were fuller than usual, townsfolk drawn by the promise of baptisms at the creek bend afterward. Nathan sat straight-backed beside Lottie, while Ruth occupied her usual spot near the back, respected but separate. When the final hymn faded, half the congregation filed out onto the dirt road, following the path that led to the baptismal waters. Children ran ahead, their Sunday shoes kicking up dust, while elders walked more slowly, steadied by younger arms. The creek bend welcomed them with its age-old music, water churning white over stones that had witnessed countless new beginnings. Reverend Pike stood at the water's edge, his gray hair ruffled by the spring breeze. His usual formality had softened into something more genuine as he turned to address the gathered crowd. "In these waters," he said, voice carrying over the creek's song, "we mark new beginnings. Is there any soul here who seeks to declare their faith or renew their commitment before God and community?" Nathan stepped forward first, his movements deliberate. He had removed his coat, standing in his white shirt despite the morning chill. His eyes held a quiet certainty as he met the preacher's gaze. "I seek to renew my faith," Nathan said clearly, "and to testify to God's mercy in my life." Reverend Pike nodded, genuine warmth in his expression. Together they waded into the cold water, Nathan's breath catching at the chill. The preacher's words rang true and clear. "Upon your profession of faith, and in obedience to our Lord's command, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The water closed over Nathan's head and released him, gasping but smiling, to a chorus of amens from the bank. As he waded back to shore, Lottie stepped forward, her plain dress a statement of dignity rather than shame. "I come to claim my baptism," she said, voice steady, "and to take my place in God's family by my own choice." Ruth moved closer to the water's edge, her presence a silent blessing. She had helped Lottie prepare for this moment, braiding her hair tight and speaking words of encouragement in the early dawn. The water accepted Lottie as it had accepted Nathan, and when she emerged, her face shone with joy unconnected to any mirror's reflection. Ruth stood as her witness, crossing her arms in the Comanche gesture of respect, while several of the townswomen who had once whispered now called out words of welcome. After the baptisms, blankets appeared on the new grass, laden with simple feast day offerings. Nathan, Lottie, and Ruth shared coarse bread and apple preserves, the fruit's sweetness preserved from last fall, speaking of cycles of renewal. Their quiet contentment drew others to join them, conversation flowing as naturally as the creek beside them. As the afternoon light softened, Nathan excused himself briefly and returned carrying something wrapped in burlap. He gathered Lottie and Ruth, leading them to the rebuilt fence where months ago a cruel plank had marked Lottie's lowest moment. "I've been working on this," he said, unwrapping his burden. In his hands lay a sign, carved from oak salvaged from the burned cabin. The wood bore darker streaks from the fire, but Nathan had transformed them into part of the beauty of the piece. In clear, careful letters, it read, "All are welcome home." Lottie's breath caught as Nathan hung the sign where the hateful plank had once swung. Ruth touched the letters gently, nodding approval at how the fire marks emphasized rather than marred the message. "It's perfect," Lottie whispered, understanding how Nathan had redeemed not just the wood, but the memory of that space. While the afternoon light still held, Lottie and Ruth seized the moment to speak with Reverend Pike about the school plans. They found him more than receptive, perhaps eager to demonstrate his own changed heart. 3 afternoons a week would suit well, he agreed, reviewing their proposal. The church stands empty those days, and education is surely God's work. Ruth produced the agency-approved readers she had already secured, while Lottie explained their plans to write to Fort Garland's chaplain requesting spare slates for students who couldn't afford their own. "We'll need to be creative with supplies," Lottie admitted, "but we'll make do. Every girl deserves a chance to learn her letters, no matter her circumstances." The preacher's eyes misted slightly as he gave his blessing to their plan. "The church will be honored to host such work," he said. As the sun began its descent behind the peaks, a rider appeared on the road from town, making straight for their group. He carried a thick envelope from Denver, marked with the attorney's seal. Nathan accepted it with steady hands, though his heart beat faster as he broke the wax. The letter inside bore the best possible news. The recording was complete, the title secure. Lottie's claim to her mother's creek parcel was now legally unassailable. The papers included official stamps and registrations, each one a shield against future challenges. Lottie held the documents with wonder, touching her mother's name where it appeared in flowing script. Ruth squeezed her shoulder in silent celebration, while Nathan stood straight and proud beside them both. As evening drew its purple curtain across the valley, they made their way back to the cabin. The oiled paper window glowed with lamplight, transforming the simple structure into a beacon of welcome. Nathan carried out 2 wooden chairs, setting them carefully on the porch he had built with such care. Inside, Lottie moved with quiet purpose to the shelf Nathan had crafted from fresh-cut pine. She placed the family Bible there, tucking her mother's papers safely between its pages. The shelf stood at just the right height, not too high to reach, not too low to honor its contents. They settled into the porch chairs, wrapped in the peaceful quiet of approaching night. The creek's voice carried clearly to them, swollen with spring's promise. Its song spoke of renewal, of hope as strong and steady as the mountain thaw feeding its waters. Neither felt the need to speak. Their comfortable silence held all the words they needed. The last light painted the peaks in rose and gold, while the valley settled into gentle shadow. Through the open cabin door, they could see the Bible on its shelf, their hard-won papers secure within its pages. The new gate sign caught the fading light, its message of welcome clear even in the gathering dusk, a testament to how far they had come, and a promise of the path ahead. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.